What is so excellent about the practice of Zazen that you are teaching that makes these other practices useless? And I say, there is no value in Buddhists arguing amongst themselves over which philosophy is better and which is worse, about shallow truths or deeper truths. We only need to know whether the practice is genuine or not. There are many ways that Buddhist masters of the past have realized what reality is, relying on their experiences in nature, and we are surrounded by reality in all its many aspects all the time. Every particle in nature contains the truth. So phrases like mind here and now is Buddha and so on are just descriptions. We shouldn't get caught by words, but look to see what the words are pointing to. When I tell people only to practice Zazen as the way to attain the Buddha's wisdom, I am showing them a subtle truth that Buddhas have passed on from person to person. In this way they can come to realize what is true. But for this purpose we need to choose someone who has experienced that for themselves. To take as our teacher someone who only learns through words and does not practice Zazen themselves is like the blind leading the blind. This is the way in which our Buddhist ancestors attained and transmitted the state of truth, and we revere them for it. And it is students learning from teachers that allow the teachers to live in the state of truth and maintain it. Whoever comes to ask for teachings, whether they are Shintoists or excellent scholars of Buddhist theory, we teach them all the practice of Zazen that makes clear the state of truth. Other schools have nothing to touch this. Disciples of the Buddha should simply learn the truth of Buddhism. We should remember that we all start out with and still have the natural state of truth, and if we maintain it, it will stay with us forever. But because we cannot see this, we get caught up in all kinds of ideas which we think are real and end up chasing after them, missing what is right in front of us. This confusion of intellectual ideas is like imaginary flowers whose scent attracts us. We hear about the 12 this and the 4 that, the 3 this and the 7 that, and we think about whether we have Buddha nature or whether we don't, and the list is endless. Following these intellectual ideas is not the right way, but when we sit in exactly the same posture as Gautama Buddha sat in and let go of all images and ideas, then the area in which we feel deluded or enlightened, feel emotional or think about things, disappears. There is then no difference between what is sacred and special and what is ordinary. We are free from our intellectual cage and can access the state of great wisdom. How can being caught up in the trap of words and their meanings compare with this? And someone asks, but I learned that there are 3 kinds of training: keeping the precepts, attaining the balanced state, and accessing wisdom. And I learned that the practice of dhyana is only one of 6 practices: giving, observing the precepts, patience, diligence, dhyana, and wisdom. All bodhisattvas have to learn these things, whether they are clever or stupid. Surely Zazen is only one of these. Why do you say that Gautama Buddha's true teachings are all concentrated in Zazen alone? And I say, the reason you ask this question has to do with the fact that the name of the supreme method of Buddha, the great practice that the Buddha established, was shortened from Zazen to Zen. His teaching became known as the Zen school. This name was never heard in India. It was invented in China and Japan. When Master Bodhidharma came to Shaolin Temple and sat in front of the wall, practicing Zazen for 9 years, none of the monks or lay people living there knew that Zazen was the practice of the Buddha himself. So they called Master Bodhidharma a Brahmin monk who made a religion out of Zazen. After him, all of his descendants devoted themselves to practicing Zazen. But stupid people who did not know that Zazen was the practice of the Buddha talked about Zazen Buddhism, which became shortened to Zen Buddhism. This is clear from the records of our ancestors, but we should not talk about Zazen as being one of the 6 practices or one of the 3 kinds of training. No one through the ages has ever tried to hide the fact that the practice of Zazen itself is what is transmitted from one teacher to one student. Long ago on Vulture Peak, this was the storehouse of the eye of the truth. This was the clear state of mind that Gautama Buddha passed to Mahakasyapa. All the beings of all the spiritual realms witness this fact and will guard and maintain it. Just remember that to transmit the practice of Zazen is to transmit the whole of Buddha's teachings of reality. Nothing can compare with this. And someone asks, why is it that Buddhists recommend us only practice dhyana and in that one sitting posture out of the 4 standard postures of walking, standing, sitting and lying down? And I say, it is impossible to enumerate all the different ways that Buddhas of the past have practiced in order to enter the state of real experience. But the fact that Buddhists practice this one form is reason enough. We don't need to look for deeper reason. One of our ancestors said that sitting in Zazen is a peaceful and joyful gate to the real world. So we can conclude that sitting in Zazen is the most peaceful and joyful of the 4, and is not just practiced by a few Buddhas. It has been the way of all Buddhas and all their ancestors. And someone asks, someone who has not yet experienced and understood the truth of Buddhism might be able to benefit by practicing Zazen. But what can we hope to get from Zazen after we have already clarified what the truth is? And I say, it is stupid to ask a fool to interpret your dreams or to give a mountaineer oars. But I will try to explain to you. The idea that we practice Zazen in order to become enlightened comes from people who do not know what Buddhism is. In reality, practicing Zazen is being enlightened. When we practice now, the state we sit in is the enlightened state. Someone practicing Zazen for the first time is also sitting in the enlightened state. This is why our Buddhist ancestors were careful to teach us that there is no special state called enlightenment that we get as a result of practicing Zazen. There is only the state in Zazen. Our state in Zazen is what is meant by the enlightened state, and the word enlightenment describes our state in Zazen. We sit in a state in which we experience nothing beginning and nothing ending. This is how practicing Zazen made Gautama Buddha and his successor Mahakasyapa one with reality, and Master Bodhidharma and Master Daikan Ino also both practiced Zazen and were practiced by Zazen in the clear state. All those who live in the real world and keep themselves grounded by their practice are like this. This state where there is no separation between what we are practicing and what we attain is always present. Being fortunate to be taught the subtle practice of Zazen by a teacher in person, we who are beginners in pursuing the truth can claim our share of realization of what is here already because we have no intention to get anything. Remember that our ancestors have repeatedly encouraged us to practice Zazen regularly in order to avoid our tendency to split our real experience into parts and expect to get something out of Zazen. After finishing the practice, it fills our body and mind and stays with us. When I was in China, I saw monasteries with Zazen halls that were big enough for 500 or 600 monks to practice Zazen in, and they were encouraged to practice Zazen many times during the day and the evening. The leader of one of these halls was a true teacher who had made the Buddha's true teachings his own. When I asked him what was the truth that we were looking for, he said that practicing Zazen is the truth, and it is the enlightened state. So just as his ancestors had done, he encouraged everyone to practice Zazen, not only the monks in the temple, but all the people who wanted to find the truth, whether they were just beginning or had been studying for years, whether they were ordinary people or deeply religious people. A Buddhist master of old said that although we can think and talk about Zazen and enlightenment as being separate, in reality they cannot be separated. Another master said that someone who intuitively sees what reality is will inevitably practice Zazen. Remember, even when we are in the balanced state of truth, we should still practice Zazen. And someone asks, those teachers of the Tendai and Shingon schools all went to China in the 9th century and learned what the Buddhist truth was. Why didn't they teach people to practice Zazen instead of only teaching idealistic Buddhism